Hello and welcome. Today's story is going to be the case of Lady Sannox. The relations between Douglas Stone and the notorious Lady Sannox were very well known, both among the fashionable circles of which she was a brilliant member, and the scientific bodies which numbered him among their most illustrious confreres. There was naturally, therefore, a widespread interest when it was announced one morning that the lady had absolutely and forever taken the veil, and that the world would see her no more. When, at the very tail of this rumour, there came the assurance that the celebrated operating surgeon, the man of steel nerves, had been found in the morning by his valet, seated upon one side of his bed, smiling pleasantly upon the universe, with both legs jammed into one side of his breeches, and his great brain about as valuable as a capful of porridge. The matter was strong enough to give quite a little thrill of interest to the folk who had never hoped that their jaded nerves were capable of such a sensation. Douglas Stone, in his prime, was one of the most remarkable men in England. Indeed, he could hardly be said to have ever reached his prime, for he was but 39 at the time of this little incident. Those who knew him best were aware that, famous as he was as a surgeon, he might have succeeded with even greater rapidity in any of a dozen lines of life. He could have cut his way to fame as a soldier, struggled to it as an explorer, bullied for it in the courts, or built it out of stone and iron as an engineer. He was born to be great, for he could plan what another man dare not do, and he could do what another man dare not plan. In surgery, none could follow him. His nerve, his judgment, his intuition were things apart. Again and again his knife cut away death, but grazed the very springs of life in doing it, until his assistants were as white as the patient. His energy, his audacity, his full-blooded self-confidence does not in the memory of them still linger to the south of Marylebone Road, and Oxford Street? His vices were as magnificent as his virtues, and infinitely more picturesque. Large as was his income, and it was the third largest of all professional men in London, it was far beneath the luxury of his living. Deep in his complex nature lay a rich vein of sensualism, at the sport of which he placed all the prizes of his life. The eye, the ear, the touch, the palate, all were his masters. The bouquet of old vintages, the scent of rare exotics, the curves and tints of the daintiest potteries of Europe, it was to these that the quick-running stream of gold was transformed. And then there came his sudden mad passion for Lady Sannox, when a single interview, with 2 challenging glances and a whispered word, set him ablaze. She was the loveliest woman in London, and the only one to him. He was one of the handsomest men in London, but not the only one to her. She had a liking for new experiences, and was gracious to most men who wooed her. It may have been cause, or it may have been effect, that Lord Sannox looked 50, though he was but 36. He was a quiet, silent, neutral-tinted man, this lord, with thin lips and heavy eyelids, much given to gardening and full of home-like habits. He had at one time been fond of acting, had even rented a theatre in London, and on its boards had first seen Miss Marian Dawson, to whom he had offered his hand, his title, and the third of a country. Since his marriage, his early hobby had become distasteful to him. Even in private theatricals it was no longer possible to persuade him to exercise the talent which he had often showed that he possessed. He was happier with a spud and a watering-can among his orchids and chrysanthemums. It was quite an interesting problem whether he was absolutely devoid of sense, or miserably wanting in spirit. Did he know his lady's ways and condone them, or was he merely a blind, doting fool? It was a point to be discussed over the teacups in snug little drawing-rooms, or with the aid of a cigar in the bow-windows of clubs. Bitter and plain were the comments among men upon his conduct. There was but one who had a good word to say for him, and he was the most silent member in the smoking-room. He had seen him break in a horse at the university, and it seemed to have left an impression upon his mind. But when Douglas Stone became the favourite, all doubts as to Lord Sannox's knowledge or ignorance were set for ever at rest. There was no subterfuge about Stone. In his high-handed, impetuous fashion, he set all caution and discretion at defiance. The scandal became notorious. A learned body intimated that his name had been struck from the list of its vice-presidents. 2 friends implored him to consider his professional credit. He cursed them all 3, and spent 40 guineas on a bangle to take with him to the lady. He was at her house every evening, and she drove in his carriage in the afternoons. There was not an attempt on either side to conceal their relations, but there came at last a little incident to interrupt them. It was a dismal winter's night, very cold and gusty, with the wind whooping in the chimneys and blustering against the window-panes. A thin spatter of rain tinkled on the glass with each fresh sough of the gale, drowning for the instant the dull gurgle and drip from the eaves. Douglas Stone had finished his dinner, and sat by his fire in the study, a glass of rich port upon the malachite table at his elbow. As he raised it to his lips, he held it up against the lamplight, and watched with an eye of a connoisseur the tiny scales of beeswing which floated in its ruby depths. The fire, as it spurted up, threw fitful lights upon his bald, clear-cut face, with widely opened grey eyes, its thick yet firm lips, and the deep square jaw, which had something Roman in its strength and its animalism. He smiled from time to time as he nestled back in his luxurious chair. Indeed, he had a right to feel well pleased, for against the advice of 6 colleagues, he had performed an operation that day of which only 2 cases were on the record, and the result had been brilliant beyond all expectation. No other man in London would have had the daring to plan, or the skill to execute such a heroic measure. But he had promised Lady Sannox to see her that evening, and it was already 8:30. His hand was outstretched to the bell to order the carriage when he heard the dull thud of the knocker. An instant later there was the shuffling of feet in the hall, and the sharp closing of a door. "A patient to see you, sir, in the consulting room," said the butler. "About himself?" "No, sir, I think he wants you to go out." "It's too late," cried Douglas Stone, peevishly. "I won't go." "This is his card, sir." The butler presented it upon the gold salver which had been given to his master by the wife of a prime minister. "Hamil Alim Smyrna? Hum! The fellow is a Turk, I suppose." "Yes, sir. He seems as if he came from abroad, sir, and he's in a terrible way." "Tut, tut, I have an engagement. I must go somewhere else. But I'll see him. Show him in here, Pym." A few moments later, the butler swung open the door and ushered in a small and decrepit man, who walked with a bent back and with the forward push of the face and blink of the eyes which goes with extreme short sight. His face was swarthy, and his hair and beard of the deepest black. In one hand he held a turban of white muslin, striped with red, in the other a small chamois leather bag. "Good evening," said Douglas Stone, when the butler had closed the door. "You speak English, I presume?" "Yes, sir. I am here from Asia Minor, but I speak English when I speak slow." "You wanted me to go out, I understand?" "Yes, sir. I wanted very much that you should see my wife." "I could come in the morning, but I have an engagement which prevents me from seeing your wife tonight." The Turk's answer was a singular one. He pulled the string which closed the mouth of the chamois leather bag, and poured a flood of gold onto the table. "There are 100 pounds there," said he, "and I promise you that it will not take you an hour. I have a cab ready at the door." Douglas Stone glanced at his watch. An hour would not make it too late to visit Lady Sannox. He had been there later, and the fee was an extraordinarily high one. He had been pressed by his creditors lately, and he could not afford to let such a chance pass. He would go. "What is the case?" he asked. "Oh, it is so sad a one, so sad a one. You have not perhaps heard of the dagger of Al-Mahdi?" "Never." "Ah, they are Eastern daggers, of a great age, and of a singular shape, with the hilt like what you call a stirrup. I am a curiosity dealer, you understand, and this is why I have come to England from Smyrna. But next week I go back once more. Many things I brought with me, and I have a few things left, but among them, to my sorrow, is one of these daggers." "You will remember that I have an appointment, sir?" said the surgeon with some irritation. "Pray, confine yourself to the necessary details." "You will see that it is necessary. Today my wife fell down in a faint in the room in which I keep my wares, and she cut her lower lip upon this cursed dagger of Almahadis." "I see," said Douglas Stone, rising. "And you wish me to dress the wound?" "No, no, it is worse than that." "What then?" "These daggers are poisoned." "Poisoned?" "Yes, and there is no man, east or west, who can tell now what is the poison or what the cure. But all that is known I know, for my father was in this trade before me, and we have had much to do with these poisoned weapons." "What are the symptoms?" "Deep sleep, and death in 30 hours. "And you say there is no cure. Why then should you pay me this considerable fee?" "No drug can cure, but the knife may." "And how?" "The poison is slow of absorption. It remains for hours in the wound." "Washing it, then, might cleanse it?" "No more than a snake bite. It is too subtle and too deadly." "Excision of the wound, then?" "That is it. If it be on the finger, take off the finger. So said my father always. But think of where this wound is, and that it is my wife. It is dreadful. But familiarity with such grim matters may take the finer edge of a man's sympathy." To Douglas Stone this was already an interesting case, and he brushed aside as irrelevant the feeble objections of the husband. "It appears to be that, or nothing," said he brusquely. "It is better to lose a lip than a life." "Ah, yes, I know that you are right. Well, well, it is Kismet, and it must be faced. I have the cab, and you will come with me and do this thing." Douglas Stone took his case of bistouries from a drawer and placed it with a roll of bandage and a compress of lint in his pocket. He must waste no more time if he were to see Lady Sannox. "I am ready," said he, pulling on his overcoat. "Will you take a glass of wine before you go out into this cold air?" His visitor shrank away, with a protesting hand upraised. "You forget that I am a Mussulman, and a true follower of the Prophet," said he. "But tell me, what is the bottle of green glass which you have placed in your pocket?" "It is chloroform." "Ah, that is also forbidden to us. It is a spirit, and we make no use of such things." "What? You would allow your wife to go through an operation without anesthetic?" "Ah, she will feel nothing, poor thing. The deep sleep has already come on, which is the first working of the poison. And then I have given her of our Smyrna opium. Come, sir, for already an hour has passed." As they stepped out into the darkness, a sheet of rain was driven in upon their faces, and the hall lamp, which dangled from the arm of a marble caryatid, went out with a fluff. Pym, the butler, pushed the heavy door to, straining hard with his shoulder against the wind, while the two men groped their way towards the yellow glare which showed where the cab was waiting. An instant later they were rattling upon the journey. "Is it far?" asked Douglas Stone. "Oh, no. We have a very quiet little place off the Euston Road." The surgeon pressed the spring of his repeater and listened to the little tings which told him the hour. It was 9:15. He calculated the distance, and the short time it would take for him to perform so trivial an operation. He ought to reach Lady Sannox by 10 o'clock. "Oh, egads, the store has fought me the entire way." Outtakes reel. The case of The case of Lady Sannox. The relations between Douglas Stone and the notorious Flub, and his great brain about as valuable as a cap of is probably the sound he made, I guess. Bananas, apples, oranges, it's all fruit. What? Totally lost, found, nope. And he could do what that Lady Sannox looked 50, though he, it's a man. It may have been cause, or it may have been a frig. It was quiet and he was happier with a spud and a watering can among his orchids and chrysanthemums, with each fresh thing of the gale. A few moments later, wrong direction. Through the fogged windows he saw the blurred gas lamps dancing past. I just don't understand, story. Why you gotta be so difficult?